What up? What up? WINBUSH here with part two of this series. Now, in the last one, I showed you guys how to bring everything together, build the scene. In this one, I'm going to show you how to use XParticles to create the liquid flow. I'm going to show you how many particles I'm using, what emitters I'm using, how to mesh all your particles together, and then add foam to the mix to make all the white water and everything come together. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. In the first video, we built this scene out using Megascans. We used one of the rock structures. We used a couple little stones here. Now we're going to get moving with adding our XParticles. So I'm going to go over to XParticles, go over to XP system. I like doing this because it adds our emitter. It adds all of our little groups here. So it makes it easy for us to pick out what we need. Let me click on this camera from a previous build. So this is what it ends up looking like. You can see here on my right hand side, all these little blue and purple tags over here. These are actually collider tags, so that when we have our emitter in our scene, it's actually going to make everything collide off the rocks. Now, to be able to add these in, I'm going to click on my original rock right here. You go up to tags, X particle tags, and then just click collider. And that's all there is to it. Let me open up the attribute window so that you can actually see what's going on. Okay, so our XP collider, our attributes here, we have bounce, we have friction, we have all these different options that you could use to have the particles react with your geometry there. And if you want to know more, click on this little camera down here, and it will take you to the XParticles site where they'll have a video kind of explaining what everything does here. It's really well. I highly suggest clicking that for everything that's in XParticles. They go over everything on all the different items there. But for this, I'm going to go to my bounce, and let's say 9%. I believe is what the rest of them are on. Yeah, so we have 9%, then the friction at 0, so our particles slide down. But I just wanted a little bit of bounce in there so they're not sticking to the surface. So I can click this off, and now our emitter, we're going to stick with a rectangle emitter. Open up the window here. So I'm going to stick with a rectangle. I'm just going to move this up a little bit and back behind our geometry, because we want our emitter to be off camera and shooting down. So let me size this up a little bit. Okay, that should be a good spot. Let me click play. And as you can see, our particles are just moving forward. And that's because we don't have any control over it using gravity. We'll want to add gravity to pull the particles down to collide with our scene here. So let me click on modifiers, and under motion modifiers, you want to click on gravity. Now usually your attribute window will open up down here, but I have it open up here as well so you can see what's going on. But we're not going to we're not going to change any of these settings here. We're just going to hit play, and you can see our particles are already starting to collide with our geometry here, but they're not really moving like water. It's just moving generically. So to be able to move it like water, let's click on that XP emitter, and then under emission here, our emission tag, we want to go to emission mode and click hexagonal. Or hexagonal, I don't know how to say it, but that's what we click there. We're going to click play again, and now you can see it's starting to load. It's starting to move a little bit more like water. Now in my original scene, I had my speed at 200 to have them coming out a little bit more faster, and then I angled it down a tad bit. So let's click play now. Yeah, because I really wanted them to hit the rocks there, and once we add the foam, I wanted, once the particles hit the rocks, the foam, they just expand from there. So I wanted a lot of collision happening there, so I angled it down, have them shooting out a little bit faster there. And then this is a real important part, because under hexagonal, we can't tell it how many particles, like the birth rate is grayed out. So in order to add more particles, we go down to our radius here, and this controls the particle amount. So at default it's at 3, but if you move it down to 2, and let's click play, we can see more particles are coming out. Now this is all going to depend on how fast your computer is as well, because when we click it down to 1, it's going to have a whole trove of particles coming out, which this is what I used on my original simulation. But as you can see, the playback is a lot slower because we have a lot more particles interacting in there. So for tutorial purposes, I'm going to move it up to 3 just so we get smoother playback. But later on, when I cache the scene, I'm going to take it back down to 1 and then cache out the scene, and then we'll be able to add geometry to it. But next, let's go up to our dynamics here. And to get it to act even more like fluid, we're going to want to add it as a XP Fluid FX. Now I'm not going to change any of the attributes here as well. Like I said, you can click on the camera here to see what everything does. But let's click play, and you can see now our waterfall is acting way more fluidy, if that's even a word. But everything is just starting to really come together. Now the next thing we're going to want to add is, let me see, let's add our foam. So I'm going to go back to our dynamics, dynamic object, and click on XP foam. And if I click play, you're going to see nothing's happening. Like, actually, let me change the color of our original particles to white. So I'm gonna go to XP emitter, click on my display, and then down here under dots, actually, let me change it to a gradient. So I'm going to go to gradient parameter and change the gradient parameter to speed. So now whenever our playback is happening, it's going to look a little bit more like water. And so our white is everything that's moving really fast. The blue, as it gets darker blue, that's more of the particles that are standstill, as you can see there. And that's going to make it easier for us to see once I add the foam. But like I was saying, we have to add an emitter for the foam, because the emitter is going to be driven off our original emitter, basically going to say when our original particles collide with a rock, then start adding foam particles. And so it's really easy. You click on your object tag, hit create, and you can see over here on the right hand side, it added an emitter right under our XP foam. So I'm just going to double click on this, and I'm going to add foam to the end of it, just so I know this is the emitter that I'm using for the foam. Now I don't have to do anything else to that emitter. When I click on XP foam, our emitter is automatically in there. Now let's click play. Actually, I'm gonna click on my foam emitter, and I'm going to change this display to red. I'm going to change the color to red. I'm gonna leave it at dots for now, but I changed it to red just so we can see once the foam starts emitting. So I'm gonna click play. Let's let it play out for a little bit and see when the foam is starting to act. And this is at default, and so you can see we're already at 150 frames. We're not getting any type of foam interaction at all. And that's because we're going to go back and change a couple of attributes. When I was originally working on this, I kind of went back and forth just at playing with the numbers and seeing what's going to react how I wanted it. Yeah, see, we're already up to 250. I'm not seeing any foam at all. So I originally wanted to have a ton of foam coming out of the scene. So when I clicked on the camera and the question mark here to kind of see what these attributes were doing, I came up with these numbers for my foam. So for my crest rate, I went way high, up to 250. And then the air rate, I did 250 as well. Now offhand, I can't remember exactly what these did, but these are the numbers that I came up with. And then down here for radius, I went down to 5%. For my min speed, I went to 17. And then for my max crest over here, I want 100%. And so if you want to know exactly what these do, click the question mark. It will pop up with the website and tell you exactly what all this does. But for time's sake, these are the attribute numbers that I went with, and they seem to work out great. Let's play again, and let's see what's going to happen now. So nothing's happening yet. You guys gotta give it a little bit of time. And there we go. You can see all the red down here. That's all foam. We're starting to get more foam up in this area. And the reason why we're not seeing a lot of stuff in the middle here is because I have my radius on my emitter at 3. Now, if I would have moved it up to 1, like I originally had it, let me click emissions. So if I had up to 1, where I have a ton of particles coming out, we'll get a lot more film interaction. But for now, this is going to have to make do. But that's how you get your film there. And what we're going to do later on is we're going to render out the film separately from our mesh, and then we're going to do stuff in After Effects to make it look like whitewater. But that's essentially how you get the foam going. And as you could, I shouldn't have hit stop. Let's play this out a little bit. I'm gonna bring up the quads. So as you can see in this right hand view, we have a ton of particles being wasted off the edge here. And now those particles are being calculated forever. Like, they're not, just because they're not seen in the viewport doesn't mean they're not, reacting with the scene and being calculated. So to save on resource and not waste that, we're going to want to add a kill modifier. So we're going back over to our modifiers, and in our attribute windows and our modifiers, we want to go to control modifiers and go to XP kill. And now you'll see this yellow box that's surrounding it. I'm going to move it up a tad bit, so whenever the particles come off the bottom, they're just going to die. So let me click play from this side view here, and you can see the particles, once they hit this box line, they're going to start to die. And we're getting smooth playback already. It's running a lot smoother. That's because the particles aren't going off forever. Now, if I really want to tighten this up, I can let it match the angle of my rocks here. Just move this like this. Now let's click play again. And this is going to kill the particles even faster. See, as soon as they hit the box here, they all die. And the way that my camera is positioned anyway, in my viewport here, we're not going to see all the stuff that's falling off the edge anyway. And so this is basically the view that we're going to have in the video when we render out. So like I was saying before, let me get this box out the way. You can see the playback is starting to move slow. And so before we start adding the mesh and everything, we're going to want to cache out our scene. And what caching does is going to take all the particle information over a length of time. Right now I have it at 1,000 frames, and I believe I have it running at 60 frames per second. Yeah, so my frame rate is 60 frames per second. My timeline is 1,000 frames. And so in order to be able to add the mesh on smoothly, I'm going to have to cache that out. So I'm going to go to objects, or other objects, and click on XP cache. And then in your folder here, this is important if you're using like team render or anything of that nature, because you're going to want to pick a folder where all your computers can actually see to. So if you're using one computer, I mean, you could just put it on an SSD or whatever. But like my setup, I'm using a NAS setup. So I have all my particles going to my NAS, and then that way my other computers can actually see that when it's time to render. But whatever your setup is, you'll want to select your folder. So you'll want to click cache type, external files, select your folder that you're gonna want to render it to, or not render it, cache it to, and then you just click build cache. Now I'm gonna let this build out. It's going to take, I think, about an hour, but whenever I come back, everything should be all cached together, and we'll continue on with the video. Okay, so we have everything cached out. If you see, I played this back. Let's pull the viewport up. Now this was at 1 radius. We have all these particles coming through, colliding with the rocks and everything. It looks really, really good. I changed our foam to white, but I made them cubes because whenever we render out in Redshift, it's going to pull from our display color. And so I wanted to make sure those stayed white as well. So that's what all this is right here. That's all the foam building up. But let me show you how to add it, add a mesh to it so that we can render it out. So now we want to go under generators here, and we open up my attribute manager. So we click on generators. Over here it says XP OVB or OVDB mesher. Try to say that a couple of times fast. All right, so I'll click on that, and now we have our mesh over here in our attribute window. To be able to add mesh to our particles, let me play this through again. Actually, I could just scrub through it. So right now it didn't add any mesh. We're going to want to take our emitter here and drag that into our OVBD. So let's left click, drag that down here under sources. And now you see it added all this blob here, which doesn't look very good. I mean, it's okay, but we're going to want to do a few things here to be able to make it look right. So like I said, as always, click on this little camera down here, and also I'll leave a link in the description. XParticles actually did a really good tutorial running through how to use this and get everything to look liquidy. So I'll be sure to add that, because I want to just show you the attributes that I used to come up with the results I did. So under my voxel size, I did 2, and then my point radius, I did 1.5. Yeah, and you can see it's already starting to, let me pull this back a little bit before the foam comes up. But I mean, it looks chunky, but you can see it's looking a little bit more liquidy there. I kept the half width at 2, and to be able to smooth this out a little bit, we had to go under filters, and I'm going to go to use filter, and you can see it's already starting to smooth it out there. But instead of the medium or median, I deleted that and I went with the curvature. I thought curvature looked a little bit nicer, and I left the attributes the same there. And that's all I did for that. But yeah, like I said, make sure you visit the website, click on a question mark, click on the camera, get a better rundown of what all the attributes do, because every situation is going to call for different schematics there. And so you definitely want to familiarize yourself with everything does here. And then to be able to make it look like water, Redshift actually has a water material built in. So I'm going to my materials, Redshift material. I'm going to rename this one just water, so RS water. And when I click my edit shader graph, let me open this up a little bit more. Over here under my Redshift material tab, you have a bunch of presets here. So you have glass, tinted glass, water, plastic, metal. I use a lot of stuff a lot. It gives you a good starting point. But all I did was use the water, and I didn't use anything else in there. So let's close that down, add water to my OVBD mesher. And now you see it turns black here. But if I go to my render view, and actually and my GI ended up rendering with the irradiance cache, but for now I'm gonna turn it off so it renders a little bit faster. Let's click play, and you can see that's kind of what the water starts to look like, and we can play around with it a little bit more in After Effects, but that gives us a base of what our water looks like. And now let's get on to how to render out the foam particles. I'm gonna close this down, move this over to the side. Our foam doesn't show up until a little bit later, so let me drag this out. Let's see, around 334. And so let me turn this off. This is from before. So in our foam emitter, we're going to want to go to tags, and then down to Redshift object. And you notice whenever you have it on the emitter, you get a new tab here called particles. Let me open this up here. So like I was saying, you get a new tag here called particles. Now under mode, I went with point instance, and my scale multiplier, I just ended up going with 0.2. And like I was saying before, if I look under my emitter and under display, whatever our particle color is, that's what's going to render out in Redshift. So I changed it back to white. For my viewport purposes, I changed it to a box just so I could kind of see what was foam and what was particles. But yeah, that's all I did for that. So we click our tag, point instance, I made it 0.2, and basically, you know, the larger your scale, the bigger the particles are going to be. But since this is for white water, I didn't want them to be crazy big. I just wanted to use a lot of particles. So let's hit render again, see what comes up whenever this ray tracing is done. And then I'll also say I'm going to render this out using puzzle mats. Puzzle mats is how I was able to separate the white water from the clear water from the rocks in the background. Definitely check out my tutorial on puzzle mats that I have on here if you need a more in-depth view. It doesn't look like that works. Let me move this back, turn this off, and click play. Let me run it through. So I should have cast out the foam there as well. There we go. So there's our foam. Now let me open up my render viewport, hit play, and our foam should show up in our viewport here. So let everything finish calculating. And there we go. You can see the foam in there now. And now I'm going to want to have our foam separated from our white water. And I'm going to do that with puzzle mats. So I'm going to go to my Redshift ALV manager. And I already have puzzle mats set up here. And like I said, go to my tutorial to learn more in depth how to use it. But I have my red ID as 1, green ID as 2, blue ID as 3. So I'm going to want to use red ID as 1 for this one. And then on my mesher, I'm going to want to have that as, I believe, 2. Let me see. Object manager ID, make this 2. And then my geometry should already have 1. Actually, I have that as 2. Okay, so yeah, my plane and my rocks I have as object ID 2. I'm gonna change my mesher to 3. And now in my viewport here, if I click on beauty, you'll see puzzle mat. I click on that and you can see my geometry, my rocks and everything are green, the water is blue, and the foam is red. And just for extra detail, ended up adding a reflection mat in here. You just scroll on your left hand side, you can add anything you want in there. You can add, you know, more puzzle mats, you can add emissions, reflections, shadows, all that good stuff. But yeah, that's how I rendered out of Redshift. And you can see our passes right here. Click back on my beauty pass. This is what it looks like coming out of Cinema 4D. Now in the next video, I'm going to show you how to composite everything in After Effects, how to make it look nice, how to add motion blur to it to really sell the white water there. And this is important as well. I did for my primary engine, I used a Irradiance cache. My secondary engine, I used Irradiance point cloud, and then I left everything at default. And then of course, inside my save, you'll want to have your multipass, because that's going to render out your reflections and your puzzle mats. I usually put it in the same folder that I'm rendering out my render in. And I usually render out my main render in OpenEXR at 32-bit. And then my puzzle mats and reflections and stuff, I'll render out as a PNG. And then down here under compositing project file, you'll want to check mark everything. And if you're using After Effects like myself, you'll want your target application to be After Effects. And what that's going to do is give you a file called an AEC file. And when we open up After Effects, we can actually just click on the AEC file and it'll bring all of our rendered files in there. And so make sure you guys watch part 3 of this series. As always, please subscribe, leave a comment if you're not understanding a step. Follow me on social media. You can message me on there as well and I'll get back to you. And yeah, until then, I'll see you in part 3.